Okay, I'm the next speaker, and I'm going to be talking about understanding and managing plant species richness. And I'm going to have just one slide on the kind of the understanding part, and really focus in on the management part of this presentation. So we're going to talk just a little bit about species richness, and then we'll talk about managing for species richness, and I've got several different topics underneath there. And then we'll kind of put all these concepts together with a few real-world examples of how we can manipulate species richness in botanical composition of pastures through grazing management. The one thing I wanted to talk about, and there's a ton of good review papers out there on plant diversity and species richness, which have come out of the USDA Pasture Lab at Penn State. And I will direct you towards those at the end of the presentation if you want to learn more about plant diversity in pastures. But the one thing I wanted to talk about that was kind of missing from those papers was species richness in relation to tall fescue. Because most of us are on a tall fescue-based system in this part of the country. I think everybody knows tall fescue costs the cattle industry about $2 billion a year in loss, gains, and conception rates. So it's a major issue facing us. In the kind of the catch-22 with good grazing management is a lot of times our best grazers are having the worst problems with tall fescue toxicosis. Because what do we do when we implement good grazing management? We make that tall fescue plant grow really well, right? And so the endophyte grows along with that plant, and it produces toxins along with that plant that when it's really growing well, and our best grazers are having problems with tall fescue toxicosis. Where we normally don't see it is when people are doing a really crappy job grazing, to be honest with you, right? So because there's not a lot of tall fescue in those pastures. So if I've got a pasture in North Carolina or Virginia that's mostly crabgrass and Bermuda grass, I'm not going to have a lot of tall fescue toxicosis problems. So one of the points that I want to make today is that we need to be looking at species richness as a mitigation strategy for tall fescue toxicosis in pastures. If we can get something else in those pastures, so we still may have a high endophyte rate in those pastures and a lot of toxins in the tall fescue plants, but if the tall fescue plants only make up 30% of the stand or 40% of the stand, then we've significantly reduced the amount of intake of the ergodalkaloids. So that's just something to think about as you start to think about species richness in grazing systems. Okay, when I was a young man just out of graduate school, and as you can tell, that's been a little while ago, I had the good fortune of being hired by a great land-grant institution. That was Virginia Tech, and I was stationed at the Southern Piedmont Research Station, so I was closer to Matt than I was to the actual main campus of Virginia Tech. And I had the good fortune of being kind of taken under the wing by Mike Henry, and Mike Henry's a really good cattleman and a seasoned extension agent. And one of the things that Mike taught me many things, but one of the things he taught me was that we can plant whatever we want in a pasture. But in 4 to 5 years, it's going to be a mixture. It's going to be a mixture of whatever we planted, tall fescue and orchard grass, and be some Kentucky bluegrass, and then depending where you're at, some Bermuda grass and crabgrass and some weedy forbs and so forth. So truer words have never been spoken. We always think of pastures, we talk about pastures like they're monocultures. But they're not monocultures, they're really complex mixtures of many different species. And what I want to do today is kind of think about how do we manage that richness? How do we manage that botanical composition to kind of get to an end goal that we have for that particular pasture or paddock? So the first topic I want to talk about is soil fertility. And really the overarching objective with soil fertility is I want to create an environment that's hospitable to those plants that I'm trying to get to grow in that pasture. So what's that mean? That doesn't mean we have to go crazy with soil fertility, but it's good if we could start in the medium soil test range, right? We don't have to have a high soil test range, but a medium soil test range and a pH of 6 to 6.4 would be ideal. And if we do that, then we're going to create an environment that's hospitable to about 90% of the plants that we want to grow in pastures. And that's really important. A lot of times people will go and look at the regenerative grazing page and say, that's really cool, and I'm going to do that. And they go buy this old farm that's been hayed to death. There's no nutrients left in the soil. The pH is below 6, and then they struggle, and they buy some polywire and some posts, and they struggle, and they struggle, and they struggle because there's just not that base level of soil fertility to support a productive pasture. And the long-term goal is for us to enhance soil biology, and to do that, we really got to have some kind of base level of soil fertility and ultimately build stronger nutrient cycles, which one of the other speakers will talk a little bit about. Okay, I put this up here just to remind us that soil acidity is still a major factor limiting pasture production in the southeastern United States. And when we get in the right soil pH range, that 6 to 7, we're going to optimize the plant availability of all the other nutrients in the soil, and that's really important. If you've got limited funds, investing in lime to get your pH in that range of 6 to 7 is going to be one of the most important things you can do as you get started. Got a really good poster out there. Harper Ritchie will have that tomorrow. She's from a research station. She did an incubation study looking at lime and fertilizer interactions on soil fertility. So take a look at that tomorrow if you get a chance to talk to Harper. All right, I want to talk a little bit about weed control in relation to species richness. And this is a little bit of a delicate topic, right? And I'll try to handle it delicately. First, we got to figure out what a weed is, right? Very clear in a row crop situation what a weed is, right? If it's not corn or soybeans, then it's a weed in a row crop situation. In a grazing situation, it gets a little bit gray, right? So to me, a weed is something I can't figure out how to get that cow to eat, right? That's really what a weed is, or something that may be toxic in that pasture. And the point that I want to make is that there's many plant species and pastures that we did not plant but are readily grazed by animals, and that's really important. We commonly think of weeds as really low in forage quality, but if you look at weeds in a vegetative state, I mean, they can be very similar in forage quality to things like alfalfa. So, and as they mature, just like a forage, they become lower in digestibility and less palatable. So grazing management will enhance the palatability of many weeds, what we call weeds in pastures. I think it's fair to say that herbicides are probably not the friend of plant diversity in pastures, right, or species richness. Now, having said that, does that mean we never use herbicides? I don't think so. I think we need to use them as part of an integrated weed control program that involves things like soil fertility and stocking rate and choosing the right forage species and varieties and so on. And then the use of herbicides when we get something that's really hard to control in that pasture. And then when we do use herbicides, think about how do we apply. That drone workshop this morning was fascinating to me. If we can think about how we can spatially apply herbicides in pastures, that would increase species richness because we're applying it only to the plants that we want to control. So don't throw herbicides out with the bathwater. Just make sure we use them as part of an integrated weed control program. All right. We'll talk a little bit about impact of species richness. And animal impact is a powerful tool that we can use to enhance species richness in pastures. We can suppress existing sods, and that makes space for other species. A lot of times when we change grazing management in a pasture, we'll start to see species that we never knew were in that pasture before. We'll release seeds from the soil seed bank that will come up and produce a viable plants that can be grazed. We can enhance soil-to-seed contact when we overseed or interseed pastures through animal impact. And one of the most important ways to use animals is that if we do overseed a pasture, that we can control post-seeding competition. A lot of times when we overseed clover or other forbs or legumes into a pasture, if we don't control that post-seeding competition, then those attempts fail. Okay, I call this slide Grazing Management by the Numbers. And this is from Southern Forages. A lot of great information in this table and solid information based on science, right? if we look at, say, tall growing grasses, for example, we want to start to graze those, say, according to this table, somewhere around 8 to 10 inches, and then stop at 4 to 5 inches. Great information. What happens if we do that? We're going to get a monoculture. We're going to enhance those tall growing grasses in that pasture. So if we do this, we're going to have mostly tall fescue in that pasture. So the numbers aren't bad, but this table is really designed for monocultures, right? So what I want you to do is start to think about grazing management. I'm going to throw some principles up here, and then we'll talk about how to apply those principles to enhance species richness in pastures. So we've got a grazing event taking place here. If we've got adequate water and we've got adequate fertility, what do we need for that plant to regrow with? The what? So rest, so good. And I'm thinking big picture energy. That energy for regrowth has to come from somewhere. And then in grass plants, it comes from two places, right? So it comes from leaf area that we remain after grazing, so that's kind of a solar panel. Closer we graze it, the longer it'll take to recover. And then store carbohydrates in that plant. So that's energy source that's stored up in that plant. Those are the two things that we really manage with grazing, right? How long we rest that pasture and how close we graze it, or how much leaf area we leave in that pasture. Different plants store carbohydrates in different places. For example, our tall growing grasses tend to store carbohydrates in the stem base, while something like Bermuda grass or Kentucky bluegrass will store it in stolons and rhizomes, which are modified stems that grow along the soil surface. Does it matter where plants store carbohydrates at? Not really, but it does impact how we manage those plants under grazing. And that's what's really important to remember. And we can use this to shift the botanical composition in pastures if we understand where those carbohydrates are. This is an old diagram from a publication by Dr. Roy Blazer at Virginia Tech, Forage Animal Management Systems. And he's got several different grasses on here and a pretty low grazing height. If you look at this grazing height, it's below 2 inches. So if we take orchard grass, for example, and graze it off, we don't have a lot of leaf area left on that plant. Plus, we know that since it's a tall growing grass, it's storing its carbohydrates in the stem base. So how's that going to do under close and frequent grazing? Not well, right? In contrast, something like Bermuda grass, a lot of leaf area below the grazing height of the animal, plus it's storing its energy reserves in the stolons and rhizomes of that plant. So that plant will do much better under close and frequent grazing management. So understanding principles like this will allow you to start to manage pastures kind of towards an end goal that you have. So let's just take a few examples and look at this. So I've got a tall fescue Bermuda grass mixture. Very common mixture as we get into the transition area of the United States. Whether we plant the Bermuda grass or whether it just shows up naturally, that's kind of a mixture that we see in pastures. And the question is, if I want to shift this composition away from the fescue towards the Bermuda grass to give me some summer grazing in a particular pasture in my system, what do? I graze close and hard, especially as we move into late spring and early summer, and I really hammer those tall fescue plants. That's going to put those plants at a disadvantage in that mixture and allow that Bermuda grass to express itself. We're going to shift that botanical composition towards that Bermuda grass. Grazing management is a powerful tool for managing botanical composition in pastures. Here's an example of tall fescue white clover. A lot of times you will go onto a farm and the pastures will be grazed so tightly that you have just white clover left in that pasture. If we want to shift that botanical composition away from that white clover back towards that tall fescue, what do? We simply raise the grazing height of that pasture, and over time, that's going to favor taller growing grasses in that mixture, and that will shift that botanical composition back towards those taller growing grasses. We could add a little nitrogen fertilizer depending on the type of system we're in if we want to encourage that grass growth also. Crabgrass, is this a weed or is it a wonder? I think it's a wonder personally, but crabgrass is a pretty neat plant, and We can use it in grazing systems to overseed tall fescue pastures with to provide some good summer grazing. Naturally, we want to start off with a thinner pasture. So we want to shift that botanical composition away from the fescue towards the Bermuda grass. We could do that by introducing a little bit of seed, say in late winter, early spring, maybe drag it in, or we could use animals to get some animal impact on that and get some incorporation of that seed into the soil with the animal impact. And then we graze that pasture pretty hard in late spring and early summer, and that's going to allow that crabgrass a space to grow within that stand. And that can provide some very good, high-quality summer grazing. We could manage it with a little bit of nitrogen fertilizer if we use nitrogen within the system, and we would apply that to favor crabgrass growth in very late spring or early summer to kind of simulate that crabgrass growth. And then we want to let it go to seed once per year. Crabgrass is truly a warm season annual, so it's got to go to seed to proliferate and come back the following year. Okay, so this is my final thought. If we take one thing away from today's presentation, take this away, and that's graze with a purpose. Think about what you want to do in that pasture. Don't graze by the numbers. Think about what you want that pasture to look like. Do I want a strong, sodded, tall fescue to stockpile for winter grazing? Or do I want some summer grasses in that pasture to go on to when things start to get hot? So kind of figure out what your goals are, and your goals should be different for different pastures on the farm. And I'll end with this, and this is my big buddy, Jason Thompson. Jason Thompson was our forage spokesperson winter last year. And that's Taylor VC, and Taylor's from Foss, North America. It's a NIR company. And she's holding, anybody know what plant that is? Johnson grass, right? So last week, Jason calls me up, and I said, "What's going on, big buddy?" And he says, "Well, I'm just unrolling a little bit of mature Johnson grass hay, trying to get some seed in some of my other pastures." Now, half of you are sitting here saying, "This guy has completely lost his mind." And the other half are saying, "That kind of seems like a good idea, but I'm not going to say anything because people think I'm crazy." But I think we can all agree that Jason is grazing with a purpose. And that's what you guys need to do. You need to go home and think about what you want to do and then graze towards that final objective. Here's a few review papers on plant diversity from the Penn State, or from the USDA research unit at Penn State. So done a tremendous amount of good work there. So take a look at those if you're interested. When we look at literature from plant diversity, sometimes it's clear and sometimes it's not as clear the impacts that it has on animal production and productivity of pastures. So with that, I'm done.